If you're a fan of anime, then you're probably already familiar with how an English dub can take a show with moving performances that create convincing characters and turn it all into an unbearable cringe fest.
Now listen here, Rio. If you ever say that again, I'll rip your fucking head off and shit down your neck, okay?
Yeah, okay.
And when people talk about dubbing, they're almost always referring to anime. But video games are dubbed in English just as often, and at one point so were films. Perhaps most notably done in the 70s with kung fu movies.
Give a shit who this area belongs to. Where I am always belongs to me.
Well, then maybe I'd like to find out if that's the truth.
And dubbing films is a process very much alive and well in other countries. To this day, Japan dubs over any big-budget Western movie that makes it into its theaters, from The Dark Knight to The Lord of the Rings. But in America, dubbing foreign films was a practice that would die off in the early 80s, right around the time that voice acting would make its way into video games. And as games would come from Japan to the US, with them would be a whole new breed of English dubs.
Queen of Concordia? Oh, you serious, yo?
But why is it that dubs are so bad? This is a question that has many answers, and there are unique reasons for why some games individually have bad voice acting. But generally speaking, there's a few factors to take into account, such as the demand for dubs in that country. As I previously mentioned, Japan dubs movies a lot, and that's because Western blockbusters are mainstream over there, whereas in the US, foreign movies appeal to a more niche audience. In fact, only 10 of the 36 highest grossing movies in Japan are Japanese. The other 22 are all from overseas, 4 of which are Harry Potter movies, which also happens to be the second highest grossing film series in Japan, just above, some cult classics like Godzilla, Dragon Ball, and fucking Pokemon? What? I don't know, I guess the Japanese just love them some Danny Radcliffe. So because of this, there is a much higher demand for dubs in Japan than there is in America. And as a result, Japanese dubs, although not perfect, tend to attract bigger named voice actors and are typically higher quality than English dubs. Megumi Han, who you may know as Gon from the hit anime Hunter x Hunter, actually did the voiceover for Ellie from The Last of Us, and she delivers a great performance. But even if a dub does manage to knock it out of the park, it's still going to always sound weird hearing a man who is supposed to be from Texas speaking French in Boston.
Attends, laisse-moi deviner. L'échange a mal tourné et le client s'est barré avec notre cam. Est-ce que je me trompe?
Because when you watch or play something dubbed, you're not only hearing a voice actor not selected by the original directors, but you're also missing out on accents, inflections, and delivery of humor unique to that language. And that's of course because characters and dialogue are written by people in a specific language for that language. You can really see this in the way that Japanese characters who are wacky and goofy translate really poorly to English.
Don't you think I know that? Ah! You greedy bastard! Scum-sucking piece of shit-festering asshole!
And when you watch or play something subbed, you can appreciate those quirks and get a better feel for the demeanor of these characters. But unfortunately, on top of missing out on the nuances of other languages when a script is dubbed, the dialogue also gets localized, which is a process of adapting the lines to be more appealing to that country, which, as you might imagine, can lead to some pretty fucky interpretations. And the effects of localization can range from harmless and comically stupid, like in Pokemon when Brock points at rice balls and says, "These donuts are great. Jelly-filled are my favorite." Or it can go as far as to completely misrepresent a character or story. Before deleting her channel, Valkyrie Aurora had a series of videos going in-depth into how specific characters from games were misrepresented in their localizations. In her video on Noctis, she details that in Japanese he was written as more socially awkward and shy, but in English he came out as sassy and edgy. In the US, taking characters and making them more edgy and badass is something that is so cringy and embodies so much of why I think localization is so fucking stupid. In this scene where Cloud is buying time so that Barrett can get away, he leaps at the enemy who is targeting him and says, which literally means your opponent is me. But of course that wasn't cool enough for Americans, so in the localization they had him say,
"Bring it on, bitch."
That makes so much less sense than the original line. For one thing, it has nothing to do with the fact that Cloud is covering for Barrett. If you wanted to get that across, you could have had him say something like, "Eyes on me," maybe throw a cuss word on the end if you want to make it edgy. Which is another thing, the original line was perfectly fine the way that it was and speaks way more to Cloud's calm and composed demeanor. But instead they went out of their way to make it sound cheesy. And I wouldn't even be surprised if this is is mostly an American problem. I went back to the same scene in French and they just use a normal translation of the Japanese dialogue.
C'est moi, ton adversaire.
Like, for whatever stupid reason, the localization team decided to just put their own spin on so many lines instead of just translating what was given to them. This all goes to show that the lizard people who are tasked with localizing translations are far, far away from the actual writer's room and oftentimes don't even understand how normal human conversation should flow.
Yes? Oh, I mean, I told her I had a friend looking for a place to stay. Was that too much?
No. It's fine. And this?
Think you can mosey up in here and have it your way?
Pretty please.
Thank you very much.
Now, of course, the biggest determining factor to whether a dub is laughable or passable is the budget. Obviously, if a game has more money to spend on voice acting, it's less likely to sound like a fucking fever dream.
Watch out! You're gonna crash! Ah!
But when it comes to comparing a game's dub versus its own sub, it doesn't really matter how much money the game has because the original voice track is always going to have an overwhelmingly greater amount of time and money spent on it. And it's hard to back that up with numbers because games don't just release pie charts showing how their budget is split up. But it's obvious that Santa Monica did not go on the same arduous quest they did to get Christopher Judge to play Kratos that they did for the 9 other people who played him. And then you have a game like Shenmue, which despite being the most expensive game ever made at the time, only spent about $30 and a half-eaten burrito on hiring English voice actors.
It doesn't look like you need a haircut just yet.
Yeah, that's right, but I was thinking about changing my hairstyle.
Is that so? Well, I suppose that wouldn't be a bad idea.
I want to ask you something.
What? Where are you from? You're not from Guilin, are you?
I'm from Japan.
Japan? I know it. It's a foreign country, right?
Yes, it is.
But there is a very interesting example to further back this up in Dark Souls 3. You see, the Dark Souls games are special because they are Japanese games that only have English dialogue. This is because Hidetaka Miyazaki, the gaming industry's most interesting and sexiest man, thought that English voice acting would better fit the setting he was trying to create. And to me, this is a good look into how much effort and money is put into the primary voiceover compared to dubs. Because when you look at the typical case of English voice acting in a Japanese game, it's hot, steamy garbage. But then you look at Dark Souls 3, a Japanese game where all of the money spent on voice acting was put into this one English voice track, and the result is a game with much higher quality voice acting and some of the most charming and haunting performances I have ever heard in a video game.
Welcome to the bonfire, unkindled one. I am a firekeeper. I tend to the flame, and tend to thee.
You'll face death. And it won't be pretty. Enough death to leave you broken. Time after time. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to have myself a little nap. The only thing to do, really, after a nice toast.
Now, the point of this video is not to just shit on dubbing itself. That's something that people have been doing for years, and I know my references have been all over the place talking about Harry Plopper and a bunch of weeb shit. But what I want to really focus on is video game dubs and why they are the worst of the worst. Which is primarily due to the fact that when it comes to which voice acting performance we experience, oftentimes we don't have a choice. The product of all of these factors that make dubs so bad is just forced on us. And that's so dumb because there is not a single movie or show that you can watch dubbed in English that you can't find the original language for. But for some stupid fucking reason, before developers release a game overseas, they will more often than not remove the original voiceover and just leave you with whatever off-brand Dr. Radical-ass dub they replaced it with. Like, why is it that when I play Kingdom Hearts 3, I am forced to listen to Haley Joel Osment struggle to pretend like his balls didn't drop 18 years ago? Because it's either that, or I have to import a copy of the game and a PS4 from Japan and go back to college so I can learn Japanese. Now, would I want to have to listen to Japanese Goofy? Yeah, absolutely not. Kingdom Hearts would be a double-edged sword, but I deserve to be able to choose between shitty Disney impressions and shitty dubbed anime garbage. And that's why I'm so grateful for games that give the player that choice. Because if you want me to feel something when one of my units dies in Fire Emblem, they cannot sound like this.
It hurts. Is this goodbye?
And I know that in a game like Fire Emblem Echoes or Astral Chain, the story isn't Oscar-worthy to begin with, and good voice acting isn't going to be as impactful. But I still don't want to have to put up with this assault on my eardrums.
Damn it, Commander. Now don't go dying on me.
And it seems to me that companies are catching on to this, even if it's after the fact. Persona 5 added the Japanese voiceover as DLC, and Breath of the Wild updated it into the game later on. And I was so thankful for that, because every time there was a blood moon and I had to hear Zelda say, Link, the blood moon rises once again, I wanted to shove chopsticks in my ears. Like, all of the English voice acting in Breath of the Wild is bad. But why is Zelda voiced by a woman from Michigan doing this offensively bad British accent?
I, the person in question, am fine, regardless of the king's orders.
But thankfully there isn't that much voice acting in the game to begin with, so it isn't the worst offense, but it did
It's all my fault.
distract me from how well written this incarnation of Zelda is. But what about when a game that is very heavy on storytelling and dialogue has a terrible dub and localization? That was a rhetorical question. It's obviously beans.
Oh boy.
Now, I had a lot of issues with Final Fantasy VII that were not related to voice acting, but I love this game's characters, and minus the filler and the insanely out of place and rushed ending, I love the story too. This tale of corporate evil, perspective, hysteria, and the ethics of being an eco-terrorist is so compelling to me, and the four main characters' responses to this world make them each interesting in their own unique ways. You have Cloud, who doesn't give a fuck about the Earth and is just trying to secure the bag while getting back at the company that treated him like a lab rat, that is, until he develops relationships with Avalanche and Aerith and gets roped into something much larger than him. Tifa is fairly simple, and if it weren't for her giant knockers and tasteless clothing, I don't think people would stand her so hard. But her reservations about the actions of Avalanche give her a little bit of depth. Barrett is headstrong and radical, to the point that he can just brush off the consequences of Avalanche's terrorist attacks. But because his concern for Midgar and the well-being of its people is wholehearted and genuine, he still remains an admirable character. In fact, every one of his personality traits is juxtaposed by another. He's a hot-headed, stubborn brute, but he's also a collected leader, intellectual, and loving father, and easily the goofiest of the four main characters. And then there's Aerith, who is without a doubt the most charming and interesting character in this game. As someone who hasn't played the original, I love the foreshadowing and mystery surrounding her, as well as the way she uses humor to playfully hide her connection to Shinra. I also love how they portray her as being not too concerned with Shinra itself, and while she's helping her friend, she never really comments on the threat that they pose, until the final act of the game when she reveals that she knows of a looming threat that is far greater than Shinra. Not to mention, she's an angel, she's best girl in not just this game, but all of video games. She's the only woman I would dare simp for, and every day I get closer and closer to turning to the dark side and using my talents as an artist to make a custom booby mouse pad. No. Stop. What was I talking about again? Oh yeah, voice acting. In Japanese, all of the chemistry and good character moments in this game are backed up by great voice acting. But if you play this game in English, all of that is stripped away. The conversations now feel inorganic and bizarre, and each and every character gets undermined by the poor performances. Cloud very quickly goes from mysterious loner asshole to cringy hot topic kid.
Quit acting like you know me.
Tifa is bad, but doesn't lose much because she isn't much. Jessie makes me want to blow my fucking brains out.
Welcome home, honey. Took your sweet time.
And much like hip-hop's favorite pedophile, Barrett in Japanese is a character who goes from 0 to 100 real quick. But in English, it feels like he's always screaming. And I think that's because of this ridiculous accent that they give him that ruins any scene where he's not shouting that has any sort of emotional weight behind it.
They were supposed to return to us.
And of course, Aerith, the best character in the game, gets absolutely ruined. All of the charm, wisdom, and wit that her personality is built on is just chalked. Like, it isn't even a case of Japanese humor coming off poorly in English, it's just bad delivery.
Monsters instinctively target weaker prey.
You'd better watch out then, Cloud.
The playful jabs at Cloud that are obviously meant to be jokes come off like serious statements, making her sound like the dumbest bitch in all of Midgar.
So do you moonlight as a crane operator or something?
Even the flirting sounds grossly unnatural, and it's so ironic because this ditzy, dumb performance contradicts the fact that she has more knowledge on the history of this world and the impending threats than almost any other character in the game. In short, you are better off playing Final Fantasy VII with the sound off than you are playing it in English. But thankfully, this game allows you to play it in Japanese, so minus the bullshit, this game's story and characters sound great. But even in games where you can change the voice acting, the subtitles are always matched to the dub. And sadly, not even a series like Yakuza is safe from this. Because obviously Sega is trying to reach a wider audience with this reimagining of the series, and with that we are not only getting an English dub for the first time since the PS2 era, but most likely heavily localized subtitles. And like I pointed out earlier with how they make Cloud so much edgier, Final Fantasy VII Remake has so many lines that are messed up by the localization team. Two of the cringiest examples are in these scenes where Cloud lifts a rock off of Jessie and where he catches Aerith after she trips, both of which result in them saying,
"My hero."
But in Japanese, neither of them are actually saying that. Jessie says thank you in English.
Thank you.
So they translated the word thank you into my hero. Do I need to elaborate on how fucking stupid that is? And then Aerith says Tanomoshi, which means trustworthy or reliable. Using an adjective like a statement in this way wouldn't sound as natural in English, but you also could have translated that to something like nice catch, or clutch, bro, and it would have made just as much sense. The commonality between both of these lines is that the localization lizards are trying to heavy-handedly push forward romance in what was already a shameless harem. And the result, like always, is just a cringier version of what was already being presented. And the point I'm trying to make is that we should be given the choice here. I'm not trying to just shit on voice actors who are just trying their best, especially because the localization team and the staff overseeing these dubs are the ones who are responsible for this lack of quality. Like, I know I dogged on dubbed Aerith a lot, and I stand by my criticisms. But when it was announced that she would be playing Aerith, the voice actress came out and said that she had never had a leading role before. And the fact that such an inexperienced actor was casted as one of the most important characters in one of the most anticipated games in the last decade speaks more to the incompetence of the localization than anything. And even though I wasn't a fan of the performance, I hope the voice actress continues to land big roles and grow. I want to make that clear since I'm just some dude sitting here criticizing someone who is putting themselves out there. And I feel compelled to make that distinction because the point of this video is not to advocate for getting rid of English dubs. Because despite whatever flaws they may have, dubs are important. There are a lot of people who aren't bothered by them and would rather play a game in English than have to read subtitles, and more importantly than that, dubs offer a great opportunity for experience to up-and-coming voice actors. Laura Bailey, whether you love or hate the character, did an amazing job as Abby in The Last of Us Part 2. But my first time hearing her work was when I was in middle school watching Soul Eater on Toonami. The difference between that performance back then, which was like your typical dub performance, and then this amazing one this year, is not just that the writing and direction and casting came from the actual sources of the story, but most likely the experience she gained from all of her past roles. But regardless of their importance, players shouldn't be forced to have to put up with dubs. Player choice and freedom are widely coveted as being necessary to the enjoyment of a game, and that extends to this just as much as it does to gameplay. And as consumers who come to games just as much for the characters and the story as we do the gameplay, we deserve to not just be able to choose the performance we prefer, but also to have subtitles that are a close translation that represent the original vision for the characters in the story, and not these watered down, cringy versions that corporate monkeys and lizard people think will be the most appealing to us Americans. But if I'm being honest with you fellas, I don't think this is getting fixed anytime soon. So I guess you can catch me back at next semester learning Japanese.